Welcome to another instructional video brought to you by SSIS. In this video, you'll see how to use a custom SSIS component that can retrieve data in a CSV format from an API. This is a custom component that you'll be able to use once you download and install the SSIS Power Pack, which you can get from the downloads page at SSIS.com, and I'll be sure to add a link in the description below. Let's jump into it. So I'm in Visual Studio, and I'm just going to drag a data flow task. And before we jump into the data flow, you'll already notice all these ZS prefixes for these custom components that you'll get once you download and install the Power Pack. And in the data flow component, you'll see even more custom ZS components. I'm going to drag this CSV source. So yes, the SSIS native CSV component, there is one, but that's only if you're getting CSV data from a local file. This custom component can do that as well, but it can also get data directly from an API. So the first thing you'll notice is a lot of configuration because, again, chances are you're getting data from an API. I do want to show you can use these three dots. I have a locally saved CSV file, so I could say I want to use that. And you'll notice all that API configuration goes away because we're just dealing with a local file. So you can do that, but we're going to use this to get data from an API. So I have a URL that gets this data, and this particular data set doesn't require a username and password or credentials, but sometimes an API does, and you'll definitely want to refer to your API documentation for how to configure these settings for your specific needs. So if you need to use credentials, you can use this feature, and you can open up HTTP connections or OAuth connections using another configuration window that will pop up, and you would know if you need to use those based on the API that you're using. Again, this one doesn't, so I'm going to turn that feature off. You'll also need to know what method you're using. Most of the times you're going to use the get method to get data from an API, but not always. Sometimes you might use the actual post method to get the data. And if so, you might have credentials, or not necessarily credentials, but configuration that needs to go into the body. And you can type it directly in this box, or you can click this little pencil and you can type any other extra configuration that needs to go in the body. The same with the HTTP headers. You can type directly into this box, or you can click the raw edit and you could edit the header info here. So if you had an API key or a secret, you could include it in that configuration. So again, I definitely want to stress that you'll want to refer to your API documentation for your particular configuration and needs. But one more thing, is the pagination. So most API calls limit how much data you can return with each call. Sometimes it's 10 rows, sometimes it's 50 rows, but sometimes you're trying to retrieve 1,000 rows or 10,000 rows. So here's the tab where you would manage how you're going to page through the data in order to get all of the data returned that you want. So back on the settings tab, again, it's super easy. I just threw in this URL and I'm going to click the preview, and there is the data that will get returned. So it looks great to me. I'm going to hit close. You can also change these settings if you're saying direct value. So here's where you could just type in directly CSV data if you wanted. We're going to stick with that API file path option. So like I said, we previewed the data, so let's go look at the columns metadata. So here's all the columns that we're going to get returned. And the component does its best job to guess how long each of these fields should be. So most of them are strings. The region has an estimated limit of 80 characters. The city is 56. But let's say we know there are some cities that have a really long name and it's 100 characters. It's going to go over that 56 limit. We can change it to 100, and then we can lock that particular field. So now that column will never change, and it will stay locked in at 100 no matter what's in the actual data that we're retrieving, and this component will guess based on that data. Now we want to stick with 100. So we're going to say OK. And now let's just drag the SSIS UPSERT component, and we're going to put it in a database. So I have a local database called test, and I'm going to make a new table, and we're just going to call this CSV data. And we're going to say OK. So it mapped all my columns. My order ID is the key. I'm going to say OK. It says, hey, I can make you an index if you'd like. No, that's OK. And I'm going to run the package. Boom, got 2,155 rows. So let's go over into SQL Server and say from our table, 2,155 rows. I mean, it's that simple to get data in a CSV format from an API. And I know, again, this example didn't use username or password or other credentials. So if you have any of that type of configuration, you'll definitely want to refer to your API documentation. But that's it. I mean, it's super easy, super fast, super customizable when it comes to getting CSV data using the custom SSIS component. If you want to give it a try and you haven't already downloaded the SSIS Power Pack, go ahead and do that now. And don't forget that there's a link in the description below that you can use to do that. And don't forget to subscribe to the SSIS YouTube channel for more tips and tricks and updates in the future.